record. All right, so this is day 4 of the Java Stack. It is Thursday. Today is the hackathon slash catch up. So this is the day that sort of is built into the schedule that allows us to catch up on stuff we haven't done. However, Monday's a holiday. So what I would like to do today is progress forward and make sure everybody's in a place where they're able to work on things over the long weekend and not fall too far behind. So I kind of want to use this catch up day to sort of front load some of the stuff, some of the Spring Boot stuff. Okay. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Okay. All right. Sweet. I see little animated thumbs, so that makes me feel good. All right. So what I want to do first is have a Maven installation party. Okay. So what I would like you to do is go to the platform and go to the Java Spring section. And the first 2 sections under Spring Intro, after the overview, there's the Mac installation. Is anybody on a Mac? I haven't seen anybody use a Mac in this class. I'm not sure if anybody... Well, if you are using Mac, I'm assuming at this point you've installed Homebrew for something in the past. So if you haven't, install Homebrew, and it's just a matter of brew install Maven. Okay, pretty easy. It takes a little while, but you should be able to, once it installs on Homebrew, Maven -- version should show you a version in the 3s somewhere. And then the Windows installation is a little bit more involved, but you just install, go to the downloads page, download the zip, and install everything. So a show of hands, who has Maven installed? I know a couple of you did it already. Okay, yeah, Manuel and Braxton, I think. So everyone else, go ahead and go through the steps to install Maven. And I'm going to give it I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. Oh, there's a chat. I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce your name. Laksh, am I saying it right?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so go ahead and install it, and we'll pause for like 10 minutes. Let me pause the recording. There we go. So when we did Flask, or the Python stack, and you wanted to use Flask, how did you get Flask into your application?
Import?
But before you could import it, right? Flask doesn't come standard, right? Flask is a third-party library. I don't know if library is the right word, but third-party package that we use to build web applications in Python, right? Where did we get it?
Oh, didn't we install it through command prompt using npm?
Not npm.
No,
Yep,
okay.
right.
Oh, there you go. Yep, there it is. Yep.
So what we used was we did open my command line.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Christian.
Remember we did, if I do pip list, that gives me all of the, well, I mean, your guys' probably looks different from this, but we used a virtual environment, right? We didn't put everything in our computer. We basically built the wall around our application. So we did pip env install. So ultimately what you could have done is just pip install Flask. I can't remember if it's capitalized. I'm not going to do it because I don't want it on my machine. But if you go to pip and it's actually it's PyPy, So pip or PyPy is basically the repository for all of the Python, third-party Python applications that we want to use. So if I search for Flask, here it is. Okay, so we did pip env because we use the virtual environment, but I could do pip install Flask, and it will, my computer, because I have Python installed and pip installed, it will go out to this repository and grab Flask and put it on my computer. Right, so if I wanted to use, if I did pip, I'm sorry, NumPy. So NumPy is a Python program that allows us to do like mathematics and data science and stuff like that, right? So PyPy is basically the repository for any third-party applications we want to use for Python. And React, where did you go? Oh, I don't want to close that. What did you use to install things in React?
NPM.
NPM. So if you want to use, I'm blanking on NPM packages. Well, there's a famous one, right? React is just an NPM package, right? So anything, any third party, reusing code, using code that other people have written, we can go to NPM, and there's basically anything you can think of. There's an NPM package that we can utilize, right? So in Spring and in Java, Maven is the equivalent of PyPy or NPM. So if I go to Maven repository, I can't type today. So this is all of the Maven packages that are available. So if I wanted to use Timeleaf, I didn't spell it right. TH. So I would just go to the version number, and let's do this one. So with Maven, we have a POM file, right? And we're going to be putting, basically, if we want to include a package in our, package in our Maven application, instead of doing Maven install or Maven, like pip install, we take this XML, put it in our POM file, and it will include the package in our application. Okay, so Maven is the reason we have kind of a weird looking file structure, and we'll come back to Maven as we move along. But let's talk about Spring. So what is Spring?
Is this Spring the same as the Spring tool suite?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So Spring is sort of the overarching, Spring Boot is a sort of a subsection or a subtopic within Spring. Spring Boot is the application that allows us to build web applications using Java. So the Spring is huge. Spring has all this other stuff, but Spring Boot is the framework that allows us to make web applications using Java. Okay. So it's a very what's known as an opinionated framework. I'm trying to think. Flask was sort of loosey-goosey. You could do whatever you want. React is kind of opinionated, but Spring is super opinionated. Everything has to be in a certain place, in a certain file for everything to work properly. Okay. So I'm going to demo making a Spring application using Visual Studio Code. I'm going to do it in Spring STS, and I'm also going to show you basically what those two IDEs use under the hood. Okay, so we'll start with the easy one. I'm going to do it in Visual Studio Code, and I've done this for some of you, but I'm going to do it as basically a recording of it so you guys have it. So I'm in the root of my application, and let me push the algo stuff before I forget. Oops, update. Algo AM. Okay, so if I want to create a Spring Boot application, I'm going to decide where I want to put it. I'm going to put it in my demos folder. Am I sharing my screen? Yeah, I am. So I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it Spring Intro. And I'm just going to make another folder called Hello World. Okay, so this is where I'm going to keep my Spring Boot application. Okay, so to create a Spring Boot application in Visual Studio Code, Control, Shift, and P will open up the, I think they call it a palette. So if it doesn't, mine comes up on top because I've been using it a lot. You may have to start just searching for Spring. Oh, by the way, I forgot a little step. If you don't have the extensions installed, you need to install the extensions. So if you go to the extensions tab, the one that looks like a little puzzle piece going into another puzzle, search for Spring. And if you install the Spring Boot extension pack, it'll install all the tools you're going to, well, most of the tools you're going to need to build Spring Boot applications. So it'll install these other three. So installing the third one down will install all the tools you need. Okay. So going back to Control Shift P to open the palette, Spring Initializer, create a Maven project. There may be an option to create a, oh God, what is it? Gradle, but use Maven. Okay. So I'm going to select Maven project. Let's go, we don't want to use the most recent. Let's go down to 3.0.10 for our Spring Boot version. We're going to use Java as our programming language. Okay, so don't use Kotlin or Groovy. This is where we're going to name our packages. So you could just make this your name, right? I could just say Tyler. This is the reverse domain name convention. So if you have a website, you would just say the reverse of your website. So my website is tylermaxwell.co. So I'm going to go co.tylermaxwell. Okay. Now this is going to be, at this point, you're naming your project, right? So if you're doing Daikichi routes or Save Travels, whatever assignment you're working on, you're going to make this the assignment name, okay? So I'm just going to call this Hello World. And you can't use capitals. I don't think you can use, I think you can use dashes. Okay, so that will be the name of my application. I hit enter. Jar or war doesn't really matter because Spring Boot will convert your jar file to a war file. The platform says war. I always use jar. It works fine. So just use jar. This is the version of I almost said Python. The version of Java that you're using. So if you're not sure, open a command prompt and type Java -version. And whatever version number that is, everybody should be using 17. But if it's something else, select a different Java version. Okay, so I'm using 17, so I'm going to select 17. So this is where we add the dependencies. We're going to add Spring Web and the Spring Boot DevTools. Okay. So for now, we're just going to use these two. Eventually, we'll be adding two more. But for now, we're just going to use the DevTools and Spring Web. Okay. So once I've selected those two, I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me where I want to put or where I want to generate my application. So I just made, in demos, I made Spring Intro, Hello World. So I'm going to navigate into the folder where I want my application to be generated. Darren, did you have a question? Okay. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm going fast.
It's all on the platform, right? So we can.
This part is not. They show you how to do it in STS, which I'll go through as well. But this is using Visual Studio Code.
Okay, but it's recorded, so we can follow
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to generate into this folder, and I'll demo this 100 times if I have to. It's a little bit tricky. So it'll ask me if I want to open in a new window. I do because, well, I'll show you why. So when I'm running a Spring Boot application, I want my POM to be in my root. If I'm using the Maven wrapper, I need all this stuff to basically be in my root. So if the .mvn and the POM file are in the root of my application, then I'm basically ready to go. Okay, so I can go to the extension that I installed, the Spring Boot extension, which is right here. And all I need to do is click the play button. I think. Hello? There it is. There we go. So what this does is the first time you run it, it's going to go out. Maven is going to go out and retrieve all the dependencies it needs to run a Maven project. So the dependencies are, if I go to clear this out, I think they're in the root, ls-la. There it is, M2. So that .m2 is where Maven is going to store all of the dependencies. So I can navigate the dots, by the way, you guys know this, right? The dots are hidden files. So the M2 is basically the folder that Maven generates to store all of the dependencies. So if I navigate into .m2, so it's stores them in, I think they're in the repository. So cd repository. So all the dependencies are listed here in the POM file. So the Spring Boot dependency is under the org section. So if I go back here, here's my, where to go? Org. So if I cd into org, this is based, I'm not going to keep going deeper and deeper, but this is all of the dependencies that I've used over time. So yours won't look this complete, but as we add new dependencies, Maven goes out, grabs them, checks the version, and installs them on our computer, or basically stores them in this file for us. Okay, so the first time you run it, it's not going to be as fast as mine, but because it's going out and it's filling up this file for us, or this folder for us. Okay, so now once I've hit the play button, notice that all of this displays, and notice I don't have a cursor. Right, so what does this mean? If there's no cursor, what's happening?
It's running.
It's running, yeah. I got Spring Boot is running, it's waiting for traffic, okay? So by default, it runs on port 8080. So if I go back to my web browser, by the way, I made a bookmark for all the local hosts, and I highly recommend it. It's not having to type out localhost is, I don't know. So if I go to localhost 8080, when I see this, I know that it's working. right? So Spring Boot is generating this page for me basically because I haven't created any controllers yet. So it's showing me this error, which is just an indication that it's working, right? So if I were to control C and stop this, and I go back to localhost 8080, that's what I see if it's not running, right? Okay, any questions so far? I felt like I went through that fast, so any questions so far? Okay, so if you would like to use the STS, you are welcome to. That's what the platform uses. That's what all the videos are in for the demonstrations on the platform. I really don't think it matters. The code is the same. It's just the interface looks different based on which IDE they're using. So Spring STS is basically, and I already have a hello world. Darn it. Let me get rid of this. Delete that. There we go. So the process in STS is similar. So I go to new Spring Starter project. And I'm going to come to the, I'll talk about this in a second, the service URL. So the name, I haven't done this in a while. So I want to make sure I select Maven, make sure I select Java 17, packages jar, languages Java. A name is the same. The artifact is what I want to change. I want to change this to hello world. And I think that's it. And I click next. Here's where we select our dependencies. So we want the developer tools, Spring Boot Dev Tools. We just click the box. That shows that it's going to add it to our application. Then we scroll down to web, Spring Web, click finish. I guess I didn't change the name. Darn it. Let me do this again. I really don't like STS. Just delete everything. Okay. So if you start up, then there's no projects in there. It'll come up with this. This might be a better way to start. So this is create new Spring Starter project. You can click on that. I'm going to change the name up here. I think that's why it messed up. Hello dash world. Make sure you select. These are probably pre-selected on mine because I've done this before. So we want Maven, Java version, jar, Java, and then click next. Now we want the developer tools, Spring developer tools, and the web, we want Spring Web. Why didn't they appear? Let's see what they're added. There we go. So hello world, this is what STS generates. In my opinion, this is kind of not very user-friendly. I think I prefer the interface that Visual Studio Code generates, but this is what STS generates. So to get started, you're going to right-click the name of the package, come down to run as, and you're going to select Spring Boot App. And it does the exact same thing as you can see that Visual Studio Code does. And now if I go to localhost 8080, I get the same white label error, okay? So this is basically just two different ways to do the same exact thing, right? I just did it in Visual Studio Code. I did it in STS, and basically the same result, okay? Any questions? Okay. So what both of these are doing under the hood is they're going to this website. If I can find it. Yeah, that one. So it's start.spring.io. And you notice when I did STS, they referenced that website. So basically, Visual Studio Code, STS, IntelliJ, wherever you're generating a Spring Boot application, they're going to this website and doing what I'm about to do on your behalf. They're basically doing it for you. Okay, so I'm going to choose Maven as my dependency manager. I'm going to choose Java as my language. I'm going to use the 3.0.10. Again, this is just your package names. I'm going to put co.tylermaxwell. The artifact is the name of your project, so I'm going to call it Hello World. Packaging is jar, that's fine. Now, if we want to add our dependencies, we come over here, add dependencies. I need the Spring DevTools, and I need Spring Web. Okay. Make sure I didn't forget anything. Cool. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to click generate. And what it's going to do is download a zip file to my computer, which is basically a packaged Spring Boot application. Okay, so if I go to my file explorer, actually, I'm going to do this in the command line. I hate how this opens up like this. There we go. Okay, so actually I'm going to move it manually. Let me go into the Explorer, show you guys what it generated. So in my downloads, there's the Hello World zip. I'm going to move this to the desktop just so it's easier. And in my command line, I'm going to cd into my desktop. And here's the hello-world zip. So I'm going to unzip it. Okay. And now if I look, there's my Hello World Spring Boot application. Okay. So I'm going to cd into the Hello World application I just downloaded or created on the website. Now, if I ls here, you can see that the Maven and the POM file are in the root of my application. So I'm in the right place. Now, I don't have the Spring Boot dev tools, right? I don't have the extensions that I have in Visual Studio Code, but I can run this directly with Maven. So if I say Maven or MVN, which is what we just installed, Maven and spring-boot run. Okay, so notice I haven't used, oh, I have it running somewhere else. Where's it running? I thought I stopped it. Huh. I might have broken it. Let me try it again. Nope.
Do you still have the one running in Spring?
Oh, STS. That's right. That's where it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Did it stop? Let's find out.
Yeah, it looks like it stopped.
This is a way to make sure. Cool. Okay, so it's not running now. Now, if I go back to my command line and do Maven, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to there's a flag called clean which if you've already built a Maven project, it'll go through and clean out all of your .class files. So if something's not quite working right, it may be that there's old class files from a previous build. So if you do MVN clean, it'll go through and clean all those out. And then Spring Boot run. And cross your fingers that it doesn't crash. Cool. So now if I go to localhost 8080, I get the, okay. Any questions?